What is the best deck list for Master Duel? Should we copy the TCG or the OCG? The TCG being the physical version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Being ran in the West with its own ban list and being about 3 months behind the OCG, which is ran in Japan and other Asian countries. What I commonly read online when players are theory crafting a new Master Duel deck is, the TCG is more competitive than OCG, thus we should only copy TCG decks and combos. As long as they have the same available card pool, of course. The problem with that sentiment is that even if there is a small part of truth to that statement, that the TCG in general runs more competitive events, it's an incredibly linear mindset that will ultimately hold a player back when playing Master Duel, likely leading them to cope with statements along the lines of, losing in Master Duel doesn't matter because it's a joke, which is the exact same coping mechanism other card game players have when trying Yu-Gi-Oh! Out in general. The biggest difference between the TCG and OCG is the existence of Maxx C and the prevalence of Nibiru. Because of this, a card could go from being great to good, which could be the difference of playing it or completely cutting it from your deck. The emphasis is that a card does not need to be considered bad to not play it, and in the TCG versus OCG, that is exactly what's happening. The same card can be great in the TCG but only good in the OCG, thus not played as much in OCG events. Nibiru is great in the TCG but only good in Master Duel and OCG. It's the main way to punish special summoning because Maxx C doesn't exist. Your opponent summons 5 times, wipe out the field. Maxx C, on the other hand, 1 special summon, 5 special summons, it does not matter. They're drawing per every special summon, which means you're pretty much punished for just playing the game. Looking at the tier list, Pure Snake Eye is the best deck in the TCG, and I feel one of its main strengths right now is how easily and smoothly it plays around Nibiru. It forces your opponent to use Nibiru at a non-opportune time where Snake Eyes could then further make more plays afterward, because if they don't Nibiru right then and there, they're going to follow up and end on an Apollo USA that will negate your Nibiru. Snake Eye Fire King, on the other hand, while still an amazing deck that has many anti-Nibiru plays, it has to make some concessions with certain hands that don't play well into a Nibiru. In the OCG and Master Duel, you will get Maxx C'd. In the TCG, you will get Nibiru'd. And that is the guiding mindset of the different formats, which decides which decks, deck lists, and combos are good. If your deck does not play well versus Nibiru in the TCG, your best end board is automatically joked about ending on a Nibiru token, aka the best end board for heroes. If you look at Unchained, it was the best deck in the TCG to the point where a ban list was required to limit Shavara to 1. But in the OCG and in Master Duel, it has never been close to being considered the best deck due to not faring well against Maxx C. A common misconception is that all decks that special summon are equally harmed by Maxx C, which is definitely not true. A big question could be, how do you know if a deck does well against Maxx C? Number 1, can it set up multiple disruptions within just 1 to 2 special summons? Or does it have enough room for a ton of hand traps to disrupt your opponent after just passing to an activated Maxx C? Tearlament is a great example of this. You special summon a Kick Callus under Maxx C, which will just be 1 draw, search for a Sulik, then end your turn. You're going to have a negate and your Kick Howl mill 5, potentially milling into more disruption during the opponent's turn. Also Rescue Ace. You'll likely be able to special summon Turbulence within 2 special summons, which will then set 4 cards from your deck, giving you up to 3 disruptions after just 1 to 2 special summons. Now for the number 2 way to see if your deck could do well against Maxx C. Can you perform the bulk of your special summons on your opponent's turn in addition to your own? That's why a deck like Branded Despia did so well in Master Duel and had to continually get hit by the ban list. And now Snake Eye Fire King has entered the fray, which I joke that you need 2 Maxx Cs to stop this deck because they're special summoning on their turn and on yours. The existence of Maxx C not only decides what deck types are good, but also affects something as simple as your opening play. In the TCG, the best play was to lead with Sharon, which is a special summon plus mill 3. In card games, it usually is always best to lead with a random effect that results in drawing or milling because it could help influence the rest of your plays. But in Master Duel, leading with the Sharon is not a good idea. If you get Maxx C'd, you're now potentially giving your opponent an additional draw before you could even set up any disruption. And this is why a differing opening play compared to the TCG and Master Duel is that you'd want to normal summon your Rhino Heart instead of your Sharon, so that if they activate their Maxx C, they're only going to draw 1, you're going to summon your Kick Cal, set your Sulik, and end. Another example is in the TCG, it's not a good idea to lead with Bonfire because you could get shut down by a Droll Lockbird. Thus, every good player not only advises against doing so, but they also use that as gaining additional information on the opponent by making the reasonable assumption that the opponent has no other good plays, meaning they should definitely use an Ash Blossom onto Bonfire. But in Master Duel, Bonfire is more likely to be used as bait to eat an Ash Blossom before making their real play. Not understanding the differences between the formats like that could lead you to making suboptimal plays. Now to combos and deck lists. This is where a good TCG player is separated from a great great player. Some TCG players early into new card releases will hide their secret combo from the public. The number one thing every secret combo shares is it plays well around Nibiru or completely counters it. Unchained is one of those decks that required some obscure lines to play completely around Nibiru, and it even went as far as to play around Bystials and even play around popular board breakers like Triple Tactics Talent. Now this is where I believe the root of competitive play in the TCG begins. The great race to find out and master the best counter to Nibiru and other popular cards, where in the OCG and Master Duel, it could be much more linearly solved by simply the deck either plays well versus Maxx C or it doesn't, and there really is not much you could do about that. Playing around Nibiru also usually requires concessions, which means that if you simply copy the TCG combos to counter Nibiru, you will likely always end on less disruptions or even lose card advantage, where for example in some Unchained combo lines, it's advised to destroy a non-Unchained spell or trap from your opening hand even if your opponent does not even have Nibiru. To go even further than just copying combos, you could blindly be copying TCG deck lists without considering that it's optimized to deal with Nibiru but not Maxx C. Remember, just because a card isn't considered great does not mean it isn't at least good. This is where cards like Tour Guide and the Triple D Vice King Requiem come into play, where outside of Nibiru, which you could play around, there is no way of punishing special summons like Maxx C does. So TCG players are incentivized into putting the maximum amount of special summons to brute force through any form of disruption, where you cannot just do the same in Master Duel with the same level of success. This is why Jet Synchron was a lot more popular in the TCG with pure Snake Eye than it has been in the OCG and in Master Duel. Comparing Master Duel to TCG, Nibiru could be the difference of not topping a tournament. Thus, you are much more harshly penalized for losing. But in Master Duel, you could shrug off a loss to Nibiru, re-queue, then likely not see it again for the rest of the day. Nibiru will never stop someone from reaching Master 1, but it will stop you from topping a TCG tournament. Personally, I do not think that Maxx C is healthy for the game, but I believe something similar to Maxx C is required beyond just relying on Nibiru. And this is where we all started coping on Chummy being our great savior, a sign that many believe that Maxx C would finally be banned. Unfortunately, at the moment, Chummy has not lived up to the hype as properly replacing Maxx C, as I think if it could, it at least would have been played alongside Maxx C, which is not the case. At the moment, it is only main decked in some Go Second decks, and otherwise you only see it in the side deck. I do want to toss in an example from Triff, where he won a regional in the TCG with Monadium and then built the deck in Master Duel, which required him to build it differently. Does it suck that he's not able to play the deck how he wants with all these board breakers, enemy controller, droplet, and no hand traps whatsoever? Yeah, it does. But like it or not, he has to play Maxx C, also has to play cards like Ash, Called By, and Cross Out to stop the Maxx C, and also make different plays plus use and exclude different cards around the context of Maxx C. Now let's go back to the main point. What is the best deck list for Master Duel, and how can you figure it out yourself? Let's look at the breakdowns for both TCG and OCG for Snake Eye Fire King. First, let's start off with Nightingale, which you'll see in many OCG decks and is also Rising. If you ask a TCG player the purpose of this card, they'll tell you it's to make Zeus. Now, the real reason they're using it is because of Maxx C. If you normal summon an Ash, add a Poplar, they chain Maxx C to Poplar activating, you're now stuck with an Ash and Poplar on the field. What the heck are you gonna do? You're gonna make a Nightingale, you're gonna give them that extra draw, and the Nightingale's gonna guarantee you have another turn. It's small things like that that you will not see in a TCG deck list. Copy it and then go to Master Duel and then not do as well. Now, instead of Nightingale, I see TCG players using Doolittle Chimera. Doolittle Chimera is really good in a format where there's no Maxx C, because it is going to raise the ceiling of disruptions you have by popping it, adding a Ponix from the graveyard back to your hand, and then special summoning it onto the field, and then reborning the Chimera from the graveyard with your Arvata effect. That's a ton of special summoning. Now, why is the OCG using Garunix Eternity and the TCG is not? If you get Maxx C'd early, you could end on a suboptimal field with your Fire King Sanctuary face up, and then on your opponent's turn, special summon a Kirin, get your Garunix out, or it's already out on the field because you ended with it because of Maxx C. And now, if your opponent special summons, you get to trigger your Sanctuary, make a Garunix Eternity, and then wipe out all their monsters, and you maybe only gave them one card for the Maxx C from you just ending on a Garunix on your own turn. Now, obviously, the TCG could make a lot better plays than that, because they're not going to end early ever, generally, on just a Garunix plus a Sanctuary and pass. Now, what about a card like 1-for-1? 91% usage in the TCG, yet in the OCG, I don't see it. The problem with 1-for-1 is like what I said with Sharon. It starts your play with the special summon, which is generally a bad idea against Maxx C. Unless your deck often does this, making plays with no monster in the field, you would then want to play a card like Gamma, but even then, your opponent having an Ash Blossom, if they want to play around Gamma, they could wildly just activate that Maxx C on your open field, and then you get hard punished for playing 1-for-1. Another difference I see between the TCG and OCG is the inclusion and exclusion of Snake Eye Oak and the Divine Temple, where they are not prevalently being used within the OCG deck list. Now, why is that? Oak promotes special summoning, and if you don't have to special summon within your deck in a format where Maxx C exists, then why include a card like Snake Eye Oak, which will likely be adding to your disruptions by just +1? Otherwise, if you're under Maxx C, this could be a dead draw in your hand, where otherwise it could have just been maybe another effect veil, or maybe another form of disruption, where if you do get Maxx C'd, you are now able to survive your opponent's turn. And then you have a card like Divine Temple, where in pure Snake Eye, you keep it on the field and it helps you play around Nibiru, but in Fire King, you're replacing it with Fire King Island after it helps you extend your plays with more special summons. Now, I'm not trying to say that Doolittle, Oak, and Divine are bad cards. They are great in the TCG, they're simply just not great in the OCG, they're instead good. Thus, we could still likely see them within Master Duel deck lists. So what's the correct answer on what to play? Well, the answer for Master Duel, I'd say, in order to get the best deck list and combos before a deck's release, is to look at a mix of both TCG and OCG, while slightly leaning towards OCG, while also fully considering everything from the TCG as a viable option. Since while Nibiru is nowhere near as prevalent within Master Duel, it still exists and should be sometimes be accounted for if you can help it. But if making an anti-Nibiru play has you sitting on at least 2 less interruptions plus playing cards that became dead against a resolved Maxx C, you are likely playing the deck worse than its full potential in Master Duel. But once the deck has been out in Master Duel long enough, generally the tournament topping deck list and Master deck list then become great data to consider, if not the best data. Right now we have some Valmonica data which didn't do well in the TCG at all. Look at this, we have tournament topping Valmonica deck lists. Now, taking a quick look at the Fire King Snake Eye deck breakdown, the data is incredibly limited because it's only been a few days. I think ideally we're going to need at least a full week or maybe even 2 weeks for this to be ironed out on the best way to play it, but still could see some interesting things here. The 1-for-1 is most prevalently not being used. You can see that Doolittle is close to a 50% usage, despite committing to Chimera maybe not being the best under Maxx C. I see Grunik's Eternity being mostly used in the Master Duel deck list here, and I think it's exactly for what I said, because if you pass against Maxx C, you could easily make this during the opponent's turn. Also, the card has an animation and is pretty cool. But mind you, Monadium Prime Heart also has an animation, and nothing was going to save this card from being used. What's also interesting is I see people using Snake Eye Oak more prevalently than not using it, but what I don't see is people using Divine Temple. Konami is aware how meta warping a card like Nibiru is for the meta, and this is why Konami goes out of their way to sometimes design a deck to completely counter Nibiru inherently. You have cards like Gigantic Sprite, which under 5 summons, you're going to be activating this to lock your opponent out of activating and summoning their Nibiru. They then created Tearlaments Rukalos for Tearlaments, being able to within 5 summons summon a Rukalos very easily. You now don't even have to think about Nibiru, and you don't have to make any concessions. You get to make your full combo, full plays. Now, when it comes to a deck like Kashtira, Nibiru is the difference between having a single disruption on the field or locking up the entire monster zones on the opposing player's field. Of course, when Kashtira was broken back in the day. When showcasing and teaching the best plays, it is something I struggle with conveying, especially to a new player, how important and unimportant Nibiru is, because it multiplies the complexity of the video when many viewers just want a quick combo to memorize. I'm thinking the best middle ground is to start my combo videos without considering Nibiru, while later diving deep into the best counter plays and combos against Nibiru, even if Nibiru is unlikely. I appreciate you for listening to this video this long. I'll see you in the next one, or on twitch.tv/dcade on Sundays as we start leaking the next pack.